Hi, I'm Beau Turner, CEO of Abundant Mines. We're a full-service Bitcoin mining company based here in the Pacific Northwest. And welcome back to part 2 of mining scams and what to look out for. When you're getting into mining, there's so many different models for you to make money and for the person that you're working with to make money. And one of them is profit sharing, where you likely are getting your equipment cheaper, you're getting your hosting cheaper, but they get a cut of your upside. They get some of the Bitcoin that you're mining. And this, on the surface, doesn't seem too bad because everybody wants to get their services and their equipment as cheap as possible. This seems really appealing on the surface. And in theory, it can work out very well because the person is making money when you're making money, so therefore they're incentivized for you to make money. The danger to this, or the opportunity cost to this, is that if everything goes well and they shave off a portion of your Bitcoin and everything goes as you think it will in the industry, if you're mining Bitcoin, you probably think that Bitcoin's going to do well. Then at the end of that deal, let's call it a 5-year deal, if you've given away 15 or 20% of the Bitcoin that you mine, you might have paid 3, 4, 5 times more than you should have if you just had a margin on the machine or a margin on power. So ultimately, it feels cheaper when you're getting in, but on the back end, you can end up paying so much more for the service than if you had just taken the cost up front and then kept all of your Bitcoin. Ultimately, we're all in this to mine Bitcoin, so holding on to your Bitcoin and as much of it as possible, to me, is the best way for this to work out long term. So that's why we don't do a profit sharing model. That's why I think that having all of your costs known up front and baked into one line item is the simplest and best way long-term for you to make the most return if you believe that Bitcoin mining is going to be a lucrative venture. Cheap power is what every miner wants more than anything. It's your biggest operating cost. It's the most important thing to optimize within reason. And many people will chase cheap power with low uptime in exchange. So let's say instead of paying for 8-cent power with 98% uptime, I can get 6-cent power with 60% uptime. The danger in this, if everything works out well, is that even with cheaper power, it takes you far longer to get the return on your equipment. Especially if you're mining with brand new equipment, the most important thing in those early years is uptime, because that directly reflects how much revenue you're making. Even if I save 25% on my power costs, if I'm making 40% less Bitcoin, that's a huge issue. That cuts into how long it takes for you to break even on your investment. And when it doesn't work out, let's say you get promised 60% uptime and then really you get 20 or 30, that is veering into scam territory where people make what seems like a very reasonable promise of 60% uptime, because most data centers are 90, 95, even 99% uptime. And then they don't even meet that. That's a case of someone getting very cheap power and getting your equipment and mining with it themselves, and then just keeping you online enough so that you don't outright think that they've fully scammed you and that there's operational issues or some kind of issue with the facility. So these low uptime, very cheap power deals are one of the most frequent vehicles for people to get taken advantage of, thinking that it's a legitimate operation. But I also want to be clear, because this is a legitimate strategy if you do it with the right people. We, for example, have in our pipeline these kinds of sites where we agree to lower uptime deals with wind farms or solar farms or other intermittent energy sources, and we can get cheaper power for our clients. What that does is, after they've had the first few years of very high uptime return on their investment with new equipment, you still get a few extra years of useful life from the same equipment after it's later in its life cycle. It does make sense for a certain point in the machine life cycle to do this, but the danger is doing it, say, abroad or with an unreliable provider, or in a way that doesn't actually serve with new equipment, for example. So I would say this is one of those legitimate strategies when done well that's often taken advantage of by bad actors and lures people in. Mining internationally is something people consider all the time, and I've done it, so I can't say that I've fully avoided this pitfall. And the reason is because internationally you can often find much cheaper power. But what happens in many cases is that cheaper power comes from a unreliable source, not necessarily an unreliable energy source, but say a poorly constructed facility or an unpermitted facility or a jurisdiction in which your equipment isn't going to be as safe. The other trouble is if you don't have the ability to go and actually see that facility and see those people and vet the operation, if something goes wrong, there's no driving out to see the facility and check on the operator. It might be a 10, 12, 15-hour flight for you to go across borders to try and quality control what's going on. So anytime people are looking at mining internationally, I always advise them, if you don't really have a high degree of trust in that operator and a solid understanding of what that local market is like, you should probably just mine in either your country or a stable jurisdiction like the US. Many people don't understand how much goes into actually providing a mining service, and it's easy to get taken advantage of if you don't understand everything that goes into it, and then you get billed on the back end. So most of us are familiar that mining takes a lot of power, and so optimizing your power price is front of mind. But if you forget about everything else because all you're thinking about is power, you can actually end up paying a higher effective power rate because you get tacked with racking fees, maintenance, labor, parts, convenience fees even, which I think are the biggest scam in the world. This happened to me when I was getting into mining myself. Was I got in with a host with relatively cheap equipment, relatively cheap hosting, and then within my first month of getting set up, I had a $30,000 repair bill. And that was because there was hundreds of hours of someone doing diagnostic, essentially just setting up the machine and looking at it on a computer and making sure that everything was okay, that I wasn't expecting because I thought that setup was baked into the agreement. And this happens all the time with other mining companies that get people in the door with a low upfront price. And then once you're locked in, once you're committed, once you have thousands of pounds and hundreds of thousands of dollars of equipment sitting somewhere that's costly and dangerous to move too much through its life, you're effectively married to this company until you decide that it's too bad for you to continue with them. And that's the way that many companies make their money. In fact, our largest client one time on the phone told me as he was moving machines to us from another provider, he said, I think many of these mining companies just make their money on repair scams. Even when things start going poorly, the trouble with this is that once your machines are living somewhere, it's very hard and very costly to move them elsewhere. Most people don't want to incur a 5-figure shipping bill because they're unhappy with their host. That takes time for the machine's income to make up for that additional expense. And so once you've gone with somebody, you're effectively locked in with them, even if you can get out of the agreement, just by the friction of not being able to get out free. One of the challenges with an industry like this that's incredibly technical in many respects is that even if somebody is doing something wrong, it's very hard for you to verify what they're doing wrong if you don't have specific knowledge and total transparency of the process. Whether it's not giving you serial numbers or not giving you repair logs, if you can't have full visibility and understanding of what's going on in the back end, you are a prime target for getting taken advantage of. Another hidden fee that people don't think about, which we have the benefit of not having in Oregon, is sales tax. So you may think that you're getting a machine for very cheap, and then right as you're about to pay your invoice, you get hit with 10% sales tax because you're mining in a state with a high sales tax. So your piece of $9,000 equipment is now almost $10,000, which is going to take you that much longer to get a return on. In Oregon, we have 0% sales tax, which means that you're not getting hit with that hidden fee when you thought that you were getting something for cheaper. Climate is so important to Bitcoin mining because even if you can find the cheapest energy in the world, if you have a climate that's too hot or too dusty or an environment that's not controlled, the lifespan of your machine is going to be shortened. The efficiency is going to be way worse because you're using energy to fight heat or fight dust or whatever it may be. And that means that even if on paper, let's say your spreadsheet says that you're making a ton of money, in the real world, you've got all of these costs that you weren't accounting for that have to do with fighting your environment. In Oregon, we've got the benefit of an extremely mild and cool climate year-round with very clean air. So machines tend to last longer, they run more efficiently, and overall that means that you're making a higher return on investment because your machine is up longer with a higher uptime and it's got more efficient operating all throughout its life. In extremely hot, humid, dusty climates, you might have extremely cheap energy, but low uptime because you're in the repair shop more, your machine is overheating and it has to be curtailed, and it's going to have a shorter lifespan if you go through what we call thermal cycles and you're going from very hot to cold too often. Every time you go from cold to hot and back again, you're putting on a thermal cycle, which is shortening the lifespan of the silicon that makes up the meat of this machine. There's a reason why we do site visits on a regular basis. One is to build trust and give transparency in a field where most people don't understand fully what they're getting into. It's also a great educational experience for people who don't necessarily have a lot of expertise in mining to get a chance to see a facility. But the other reason is because there's a lot of companies that won't do site visits. And I would treat the lack of the ability to go visit the site as a red flag. This plays back into what we're talking about with white labeling. There's a lot of companies that will not let you do a site visit to see your equipment because they don't actually own the site or control it. And they may not disclose that because they don't want to be public about the fact that they don't actually own their facilities. But a pretty significant red flag to me is the lack of ability to go and see your site. The other reason why it matters, even if the operator owns the facility and they control it, if they don't allow site visits, it could be because they don't want you to see how they maintain it and operate it. In many cases, unfortunately, operators make even more money if a site is poorly maintained because a dusty or corroded machine is going to run less efficiently, meaning that it's going to use more power for the same amount of hash rate, which means that they make more money if they're charging you for every unit of energy that it consumes. If the machine breaks more often and they charge you for repairs, they might make more money on their repair business than the actual mining business. And if they were transparent about how they run their operations, that might be discovered and prevent people from working with them. But unfortunately, in many cases, people get into Bitcoin mining and it's a black box that they can never see into. They can't see their machine. They can't see where the machine is running. And operators on the back end make a ton of money by providing a bad service. Liquid cooling is not a scam. However, it's much harder to find facilities to run liquid-cooled machines because it's more specialized infrastructure. And that means that you might be paying to lock yourself in with someone who you can never move away from. We've got the benefit in Oregon of being able to run air-cooled machines and them operate perfectly. And the other benefit to that is if for whatever reason you don't like our service, it's very easy to find air-cooled hosting. That's the most common infrastructure out there. When you have a few units of hydro-cooled miners, it's very hard to find another option to host those if they're already plugged in somewhere. Most people get infrastructure that is purpose-built for a deployment of machines and don't just have open hydro space racks. So when you choose to go with a host that has hydro or immersion cooling, just understand that that is going to be 10 times harder to find a backup host for if you ever decide that you don't want to work with them in the future. It has tons of benefits, especially if you're in hot climates, to use methods of cooling that don't rely on air and have some sort of fluid. But you should know exactly who you're working with and that you want to be with them for the long term before you buy hydro units. I hope this has been helpful and that my experience and my team's experience can help you avoid some of the worst ways that people get taken advantage of in this space and that you can get into mining profitably. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe. You can find us at our website, abundantmines.com, and make sure to follow us at Abundant Mines on all the social platforms as well.